Hi, this is going to be a video on how to make the baby hem and ruffle. I will not be using a baby hem foot attachment on the machine for this. I'm going to show you how to do it with your hand and to turn it under with your hand or with the iron. So I also want to mention that this is best when it's cut on the cross of the fabric. We'll have a better result. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, with my hand, fold under about 1/8 of an inch. So my seam allowance is 1/4. And you'll see I'm finger pressing this so I can turn it under. And so with my left hand, I'm manipulating the fabric. With my right hand, I'm going to hold it taut. Okay, so you see it's like as small as I can get it, 1/8 of an inch. I don't think without a foot I could do it much smaller because a 1/16 would be quite tiny. So just go for the 1/8 of an inch. And you're going to put it under your regular standard foot. And then you're going to want to probably ride that, and then I did the first 1/8 of an inch and then I'm folding over another 1/8, so it's 1/4. And I'm just going to roll the edge of my foot as close to the edge of the fold as possible. So basically between the toes, I'm lining up the foot. And you're going to want to sew pretty slowly to make sure that this is nice and even. Sorry, there's a bunch of threads in my way here. So again, remember it was turn under 1/8 and then turn under another 1/8, a total of 1/4 inch. And I'm just, with my right hand, I'm doing the other the other 1/8 of an inch fold, and just holding it with my left hand to maintain the fold. And I'm going to take my right hand again and fold the other 1/8 of an inch over, finger press it. Kind of a long stretch here so that you could see how it is with the ruffles. Okay, I'm almost coming to the end. You can fast forward the video in these sections. I recorded it in a slow motion for you so that it doesn't go too fast. But in these areas, feel free to just fast forward once you know how to handle it. So even when I get to the end, I'm gonna hold it again with my left hand. I'm controlling holding the fold, and then with my right hand, I'm controlling so it doesn't unfold on me. If this was a silky fabric, like a silk charmeuse, it would be very hard to do this with your hand. You'd want to pre-press it with the machine and maybe even hand base this edge down, because the muslin's, like I always say, is very user-friendly. It does whatever you want it to do. So there it is. There's my top side. See, nice and straight, hopefully. And then your underside is where you're going to want to press this. Here's the top side. And then here's the underside. So on the underside is where I'm going to want to take my iron and press it from the back side. Okay. Now I'm going to show you how to, on the other side, how to do the ruffle. And so I have added an extra 1/4 of an inch to my seam allowance, and you'll probably at the end of the movie understand why more. But when your fabric is all sheared up at the top, it's a little hard to handle if it's too short. You're going to put your sewing machine, if it's an industrial, on a number, I would say 4. If it's the home machine like I'm doing here, I'm doing it, I think it's 3.6 or 4 also. I'm not sure what your machines will have as a setting for the long stitch, how they mark it on your home machine. So anyway, I would say about a 4. You want to have the stitch long enough so that you can gently pull it, but not too long where the gathers won't come together nicely on the thin fabric. If it's a thicker fabric, you may have to adjust it. So do a little sample first, as always, to make sure that the stitch length is what you want it to be. I'm going to go ahead and sew. My first seam is at my 1/2 inch, because remember I added a 1/4. So I'm just going to sew it and make sure that it doesn't start to want to gather up on you, which it can. See, with my hand I'm kind of flattening it out, because you want to control all the fullness in this ruffle. You also don't want to pull your fabric, because at the end we want to have consistent ruffles. I'm just making sure nothing's pulling. I also would like to mention that I'm sewing with the right side up, as you can see the words on my muslin there. It's important to remember which side you're sewing from, and you'll know why in a couple of minutes. Okay, at the end, try to leave maybe a 6-inch thread, 5 or 6 inch tail. My machine automatically cut it off, so I'm going to have to finagle it. But okay, now with your foot, align the edge of your foot to the edge of this seam. And you can see my stitches are quite large. Hopefully you can tell in the video. Okay, so here I'm going to put it under, lining it up, and I'm going to sew nice and even. Make sure you really articulate this seam. You don't want to have it uneven, because when you go to shear the ruffles, they're not going to be as beautiful. You know, it'll start to pull and angle the ruffle a bit. Excuse my hand, sorry. Okay, so I'm doing the exact same thing, making sure the fabric doesn't gather up on me. All the way to the end. And again, remember when you get to the end to leave a long tail. It just makes it easier for the initial pulling of it. So I'm going to leave the tail. And also make sure you leave enough thread on your machine so it doesn't pull out on you. Okay, remember when I mentioned to know what the top and the bottom is? Because it's a lock stitch machine, so you want to pull the bobbin threads, not the top threads. So I'm going to grab one of each from the bottom only. You're not going to be pulling the top. Sorry, my hand's in the way. It'll be out in a minute. It's hard to do this. And I'm going to gently tug it, very gently, because you don't want to break your threads. And I'm going to take my left hand and I'm going to hold on to the stitches with my thumb and just gently tug at the threads, move the gathers down a bit, and you're going to do this all the way till you get to the end. And in this sample, I'm going to make the initial gathers as full as possible to show you the extreme, and then I'll show you how to loosen them up. If you are using anything other than muslin, or heavier fabric than muslin, I would suggest getting maybe a buttonhole thread or a top stitching thread. Only if it's not a fabric where the holes will, or that if it made holes, it would be a problem. So like you wouldn't want silk charmeuse with a top stitching thread necessarily, because it might leave holes that you don't like. So just be conscious of your fabric and your thread. If you pop these threads, that's why I'm going super slow, you will have to start over. You can't just like join it back in the middle somewhere. So just keep all of that in mind, and nothing should ever be a rush. Okay, so I'm getting to the end. Now I'm going to slide everything down. And you see with my left thumb, I'm trying to keep it, the top of the ruffle straight. That's my extra seam allowance you can see there. And you'll understand why I did that in a minute, hopefully. So almost done. So I'm working from the back side, as you can see with my writing. Now I'll flip it to the front, and I'll just take my fingers and try to straighten it all up at the top so that my gathers are nice. And then pull it with my other hand down at the bottom, just aligning them all perfectly. And now you can see where those stitch lines are. That's where you would be attaching your, let's say this was a puffy sleeve. This would be the top of my sleeve. I'd be sewing at the bottom stitch onto my garment. And so by adding that extra seam allowance, it gives me more room to play with, and I can grade that off or trim that off later. But also note that my stitch lines are really perfect. And if they weren't, like if it came down 1/4 of an inch in areas or 1/8 of an inch, it would start to skew the ruffle, and then when I go to put it to my garment, it would make it very uneven, right? So this is my 2 rows. This is my top side. If you like what you have when you're done, just go ahead and knot the threads from the front and the back so it doesn't pull out. That's only when you like what you have, though. So now I'm going to show you how you can start adjusting the ruffles to be less full. Just gently ungathering them so I don't pop the thread. And this is how, if you're making samples, you can play around before you pattern make, because obviously if they were made for a pattern, you'd have notches exactly where the fullness would be and where it would line up to your, let's say, your sleeve again, or your waistline of your skirt, for example. So now hopefully you can get an idea of why I would have chosen this small baby hem for something with the ruffle. Get it all on the camera there. See how the lightness works very well with the ruffle. If you had a thicker hem at the bottom, it would totally change it. It wouldn't be wrong. I'm just saying that you should make samples with the different hem lines and see how you like them. And that's it for the ruffle and the baby hem.